Okay, so imagine you are sitting on a plane at 35,000 feet, maybe some turbulence, that small spike of anxiety as things shake, and part of what keeps you calm is a simple assumption. Somewhere in Washington, somebody serious is regulating this industry with both hands. Not one hand on the rulebook and the other on a stock portfolio, betting on the companies they're supposed to police. That assumption, it turns out, might be wrong, because the man Donald Trump chose to run the Federal Aviation Administration, Bryan Bedford, is currently under investigation by the Senate for violating the ethics agreement he signed to get the job. And the violation isn't minor. According to the Office of Government Ethics, Bedford still holds significant equity in Republic Airways, the regional airline he used to run, months after the deadline he promised to divest by. We're talking about a stake worth somewhere between $6 and $30 million. That is not a rounding error. That is one of the largest individual positions in that company, and he is the guy regulating it. Now here's the timeline because the details matter enormously. July 9th, Bedford gets confirmed as FAA administrator. As part of his confirmation, he signed an ethics agreement promising to sell his airline holdings, quote, as soon as practicable, but not later than 90 days after confirmation. No footnotes, no loopholes, 90 days to get out of stocks that clearly conflict with regulating the aviation industry. That clock was supposed to close in early October. It is now December. On December 8th, the Senate Commerce Committee received a letter from the Office of Government Ethics, stating that Bedford, quote, failed to comply with certain provisions of his ethics agreement regarding holdings in Republic Airways holdings. Translation: he still owns the stock. He missed the deadline. He violated the agreement he signed to get the job. Senator Maria Cantwell, chair of the Commerce Committee, responded exactly how oversight is supposed to work. She sent Bedford a letter on December 9th saying this appears to be a clear violation of your ethics agreement. This is unacceptable and demands a full accounting. She pointed out more than 150 days had passed since confirmation, far beyond the 90-day limit he agreed to, and demanded details on exactly what he still owns and which decisions he has recused himself from. But here's where it gets worse. The OG letter notes Bedford didn't just passively miss the deadline. He actively tried to change the deal after he was already in office. He approached ethics officials asking to amend his agreement, requesting more time to meet his obligations. The ethics office said no. That kind of extension is only granted in narrow circumstances, and they didn't see justification here. Even after that denial, he still hadn't fully sold his Republic stake by early December. If you tried that with a basic compliance deadline at your job, it wouldn't be called a mix-up. It would be called defiance. And while Bedford was missing his ethics clock and trying to renegotiate his promises, Republic Airways was doing deals. In April, Republic and Mesa Air Group announced a merger combining their regional fleets into a single carrier, around 310 Embraer jets, over 1,250 daily departures. Mesa shareholders would own 12% of the combined company. Republic shareholders, 88%. Projected revenues, $1.9 billion. Adjusted, EBITDA north of $320 million. They pitched it as America's regional airline of choice with better capital structure and improved margins. And one of those Republic shareholders benefiting from this merger, the man running the FAA, the guy who oversees safety rules, pilot training requirements, maintenance standards, the entire regulatory framework those jets operate under. So let's talk about why ethics agreements exist in the first place, because this isn't bureaucratic box checking. This is fundamental to how regulation is supposed to work. When you regulate an industry, you have enormous power over the companies in that sector. You decide which safety rules they must follow, what inspections are required, whether they can operate certain routes, how they train pilots, how they maintain aircraft. Every one of those decisions affects profitability. Stricter safety rules cost money. More inspections mean downtime. Higher training standards mean more expensive pilots. If you own stock in one of the companies you are regulating, suddenly you have two competing interests in your head. The public interest says make aviation as safe as possible, regardless of cost to airlines. Your private financial interest says don't impose costs that will hurt the stock price of companies you own. Ethics agreements exist to eliminate that second voice from your decision-making by requiring you to divest to get your money out. So the only question in your head is what is safe and legal, not what is profitable for your portfolio. And Bedford's position makes this especially acute because he is not some minor player with a small position. His financial disclosure at nomination showed between $6 and $30 million in Republic Airways stock, restricted and unrestricted shares. Even at the low end, that makes him one of the most heavily invested individuals in that company. And Republic isn't some tiny regional nobody. They operate hundreds of jets under capacity, purchase agreements with American, Delta, and United. They're a major player in the regional aviation market. So you have the FAA administrator, the person with ultimate regulatory authority over us aviation, holding a massive personal stake in one of the companies he is regulating. That is not a potential conflict of interest. That is an actual, realized, dictionary definition conflict of interest, unless you divest, which is why the 90-day clock existed. It was supposed to create a bright line, a clear deadline, after which Bedford would have zero financial interest in how his decisions affected Republic Airways. But Bedford apparently didn't see it that way. According to the ethics office, he not only missed the deadline, he tried to negotiate for more time after the fact. Think about what that means. He signed an agreement as a condition of getting the job. Then once he had the job and the Senate couldn't easily take it back, he decided the agreement was negotiable. That is not good faith compliance. That is testing whether anyone will actually enforce the rules. And for months, it seems like the answer was no one was enforcing them, until the Office of Government Ethics finally sent a formal notification to the Senate that he was in violation. How long would this have gone on if they hadn't? Would Bedford have just kept his Republic stock indefinitely while regulating the company, hoping nobody noticed or cared? The fact that he tried to amend the agreement after being denied suggests he thought he could get away with it. Now let's talk about the timing of the Republic-Mesa merger, because this is where the conflict becomes concrete rather than abstract. The merger was announced in April, a few months before Bedford's confirmation, but while his nomination was already public. Republic shareholders, of which Bedford is one of the largest, would own 88% of the combined company. Mesa shareholders, 12%. The combined entity would have better economies of scale, more negotiating power with the major carriers they serve, improved margins. In other words, this merger is designed to create value for Republic shareholders. And Bedford, who signed an ethics agreement promising to stop being a Republic shareholder within 90 days, was still a Republic shareholder when this value creation is happening. That means his personal financial position benefits from a merger involving a company he is now regulating. Think about the decisions the FAA might make that affect this merger. Pilot training requirements, maintenance oversight, certification of the combined fleet, safety standards for regional operations. Every one of those decisions affects whether this merger succeeds and how profitable the combined company becomes. If Bedford is tough on regulation, costs go up, margins shrink, stock price potentially suffers. His portfolio takes a hit. If he is lenient, costs stay low, margins expand, stock price potentially rises, his portfolio benefits. Now he'll say he has recused himself from any decisions directly involving Republic, and maybe he has. But recusal is hard to police when you are the boss. Who is checking whether he is recusing from every relevant decision? Who is ensuring his deputies aren't making calls that he would make differently if he didn't have this conflict? And even if recusal is perfect, the appearance of conflict undermines trust in the entire regulatory process. Here is an analogy that might make this clearer. Imagine you are getting surgery, and you find out your surgeon owns stock in the medical device company that makes the implant he is recommending for your procedure. He tells you, don't worry. This is the best device for your situation. My ownership has nothing to do with my recommendation. Would you trust that? Would you feel confident his judgment is unclouded by financial self-interest? Or would you want a surgeon with no financial stake in which device gets used? That is what ethics rules in government are supposed to ensure. That the people making decisions affecting public safety have no personal financial interest in the outcome. When Bedford kept his Republic stock past the deadline, he was saying his financial interest was more important than the public's need to trust that his decisions are unclouded by profit motive. And when he tried to renegotiate the ethics agreement after the fact, he was saying the rules that apply to everyone else are negotiable for him. Now, this isn't happening in isolation. This is part of a broader pattern across Trump's government, where ethics agreements are treated as suggestions rather than requirements. A senior Treasury official got flagged for failing to disclose crypto holdings tied to companies his office oversees. A Commerce Undersecretary came under review for not fully divesting from a defense supplier that benefited from tariff decisions. The Department of Transportation's own Inspector General identified managing conflicts of interest and transparency with industry as one of the top management challenges for 2025. Each case alone might be called a lapse. Together, they start to look like a business model. Appoint people deeply tied to the industries they regulate, have them sign ethics agreements to satisfy the Senate. Then look the other way when they treat those agreements as flexible. It is regulatory capture taken to its logical extreme. You don't even need to hide the conflicts anymore. You just promise to fix them, and then don't. And this goes directly against Trump's old slogan about draining the swamp. Draining a swamp would mean reducing conflicts, tightening ethics rules, making sure regulators aren't doubling as investors in the sectors they oversee. What we're seeing instead is something closer to monetizing the swamp, putting people in power who arrive with big holdings in their sectors, letting them sign agreements, then ignoring enforcement when they drag their feet on those promises. The FAA case is just more glaring because aviation safety is visible. The stakes are life and death, and the numbers are large. $6 to $30 million isn't ambiguous. That is a fortune personally at stake in regulatory decisions. If this is how the system works at the top of aviation safety, you can imagine how relaxed the culture might be in less visible corners of government. Bedford's background makes clear why Trump picked him. As CEO of Republic Airways, he was known for aggressive cost-cutting, negotiating tough deals with major carriers. He came into the FAA promising to modernize air traffic control, improve efficiency in a system everyone agrees is outdated. For a president who likes CEOs and loves private sector discipline, that sounded perfect. But there is always a risk when you move someone from the very top of an industry straight into the regulator's chair without a cooling-off period. They may not fully take off the old hat. That is what divestment requirements are supposed to enforce. Sell your holdings, exit your financial ties, clear your conflicts, then regulate with clean hands. Bedford agreed to do that. He just apparently decided 90 days was more of a guideline than a deadline. And until the Senate forced the issue by releasing these letters, it looked like he was going to get away with it indefinitely. So what does this actually mean for you if you fly, if you work in aviation, or if you just care about whether government regulators are working for the public or for their portfolios? It means every time the FAA makes a decision affecting regional carriers, you now have to wonder, is this decision based purely on safety and law, or is it influenced by the administrator's financial stake in one of the companies affected? When Republic Airways, or the merged Republic Mesa entity, faces regulatory scrutiny, will enforcement be as tough as it should be? Or will there be a subtle bias toward leniency? Because the guy at the top still has millions riding on that company's success. You can't know the answer to those questions definitively. But the fact that you have to ask them at all means the system is broken. Trust in regulation depends on the belief that regulators have no skin in the game beyond doing their jobs correctly. The moment you learn the top regulator has enormous skin in the game financially, that trust evaporates. And this isn't abstract for passengers and pilots. Every time something goes wrong in aviation, a near miss on a runway, a mechanical issue forcing an emergency landing, a crew too exhausted to catch a mistake, the FAA's independence becomes a life and death question. Are enforcement decisions, fines, road approvals, safety directives being made with zero personal financial interest? Or are they being made by someone also worried about how those decisions play out on his brokerage account? Bedford still has a chance to come clean. He can release a full detailed accounting, the exact number of shares he held at each point, dates and prices of any sales, a list of every case where he formally recused himself from Republic or Mesa matters. He can show he didn't use inside knowledge or regulatory power to enrich himself through the merger. And if he can't show that, if the record reveals he made or influenced decisions while holding the stock, then we're no longer talking about an ethics violation. We're talking about whether the United States let a conflicted shareholder run its aviation watchdog with his own money directly on the line. For anyone investing in airlines or heavily regulated sectors, this is a reminder of how political risk actually works. It is not just about tariffs or whether a president likes a company. It is about who sits in the regulator's chair, what they own, and how seriously they take the idea that public power and private capital shouldn't mix. When that line blurs, you might get a short-term sugar high in one stock. Long-term, you get a system investors, passengers, and workers trust less. And trust once lost is far more expensive than any ethics agreement.